All right, welcome back for another deep dive. And this one is a doozy.
Yeah, it's a big one.
Trump starting his second term. Can you believe it?
I know. Time flies.
It really does. And well, he's been saying some interesting things, to say the least.
He certainly has been keeping us busy, that's for sure.
You guys have been sending us so many articles about all the things he's been saying about Canada and Panama, Greenland.
Even some historical comparisons that are pretty eyebrow-raising, to say the least.
Yeah, we're going to dive into all of that and try to make sense of it all, I guess.
Exactly.
What's the deal with this guy? Is he trying to become a dictator or something?
Well, that's one of the big questions we'll be exploring today.
Yeah. What does this all mean for democracy, both here in America and around the world?
It's a big question with potentially huge implications. So I think it's worth unpacking all of these pronouncements and claims, see if we can find any patterns.
So let's start with maybe the most out there one, the Greenland thing.
Ah, yes, the Greenland saga.
He wants to buy Greenland.
Not lease it, not partner with them, but straight up buy it from Denmark.
Even joked about trading Puerto Rico for it.
Yeah, classic Trump.
Like, what is going on there? I don't even know where to begin.
Well, it does seem outlandish on the surface, but I think it's important to consider this in the context of Trump's broader worldview.
Okay, so help me connect the dots here. What's the bigger picture?
Well, remember his America First philosophy?
Yeah, he's been talking about that since day one.
Right. It's all about putting American interests first, even if it means being aggressive, going it alone.
Making America great again.
Exactly. And I think these pronouncements about Greenland, whether they're serious or just strategic posturing, they kind of play into that narrative.
So you're saying it's like a power move?
In a way, yeah, it's about projecting strength, asserting dominance, even if it ruffles some feathers along the way.
Speaking of ruffling feathers, what about the whole Panama Canal thing?
Oh, yeah, that's another one for the books.
He's saying the U.S. made a big mistake giving it back to Panama.
Even suggested China's running it now, which isn't exactly accurate.
I mean, there is that Hong Kong company that manages a couple of ports.
Right, but the canal itself is very much under Panamanian control.
So what's his deal with Panama then? Why is he bringing this up?
I think it ties back to this idea of reclaiming perceived lost glory.
Like he's trying to undo what he sees as past mistakes.
Exactly. And the Panama Canal is a powerful symbol of American engineering and global influence.
So by talking about it, he's kind of tapping into this nostalgia.
Exactly. And appealing to a certain segment of his base who feel that America has lost its way on the world stage.
Okay, so we've got Greenland, Panama, and then there's Canada too, right?
Oh, yeah. Can't forget about Canada.
He wants to use economic force to make them the 51st state.
Claiming the border is just some arbitrary line.
Yeah, and this was during an economic announcement about a Dubai company investing in the U.S. What an odd time to bring that up.
Very odd indeed. But again, I think it plays into this America First narrative. This idea that America should be expanding its influence.
So is this just Trump being Trump? Like, is he actually serious about all of this, or is it just bluster?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It's hard to tell what's genuine ambition and what's calculated posturing.
And that's part of what makes him so fascinating and so frustrating for a lot of people.
But either way, it's definitely getting people talking, and it's raising some serious questions about his intentions.
No doubt about it. I mean, these pronouncements, they unsettle allies, they embolden adversaries, and they raise questions about America's commitment to international norms.
And that's not even getting into the comparisons people are making between Trump and, some pretty notorious figures from history.
Ah, yes, the Hitler and Stalin comparisons.
It's a touchy subject, but it's hard to ignore the parallels, right?
It's a sensitive area for sure, and we need to be careful about making direct comparisons, but there are certain patterns of behavior, certain rhetorical tactics that are worth examining.
Well, I mean, according to John Kelly, Trump's former chief of staff,
Right.
Trump once said that Hitler did some good things.
A very disturbing claim, and one that Trump has denied.
But still, it's out there. And Kelly also said that Trump wished he had generals like the Nazis had, who were totally loyal to him personally.
Yeah, and that's concerning because it suggests a certain mindset, a disregard for democratic norm.
A yearning for absolute power.
Exactly, and that kind of language, even if it's just a fleeting thought, it echoes a dangerous historical pattern.
What do you mean?
Well, throughout history, authoritarian leaders have used similar rhetoric to consolidate power and justify their actions. They create an us versus them narrative, they demonize their opponents, they demand unquestioning loyalty.
And that's how dictatorships are born.
Exactly. It's a playbook that's been used to devastating effect time and time again.
So you're saying Trump is on the path to becoming a dictator?
I wouldn't go that far. It's not about labeling him. It's about recognizing the potential dangers of certain patterns of behavior and the erosion of democratic norms.
So what should we be looking for? What are the warning signs?
Well, for example, there's Trump's recent order to create a warrior board to purge disloyal generals from the Pentagon.
I read about that. Sounds pretty intense.
It is, and it's drawn comparisons to Stalin's purges of the Red Army, where anyone perceived as disloyal was eliminated.
Wow, that's not a good comparison.
Not at all. And then there's his appointment of Tulsi Gabbard to head national intelligence.
The Putin admirer.
Exactly. That's raised a lot of eyebrows.
Yeah, I can see why.
Because it suggests the disregard for the traditional checks and balances that are essential to a functioning democracy.
Okay, so we're seeing some troubling signs here, but what does this mean for the future of American democracy? Is Trump really a threat to our way of life?
Well, that's what we're here to explore. We need to examine the evidence, consider different perspectives, and ask ourselves some hard questions.
All right, so let's dive into those hard questions.
Let's do it.
If Trump continues down this path, what are the potential consequences for America and for the world?
That's where we need to get into the specifics.
Okay, so let's start with what's happening at home.
Yeah, let's focus on the domestic implications first. At home, one of the things we could see is this erosion of democratic norms and institutions continuing. I mean, look, we've already seen those attacks on the press.
Right, and the attempts to suppress voting rights.
Exactly.
There's even been violence against political opponents, like what happened on January 6th.
Exactly. Those are all warning signs.
Yeah, and what about that time he suggested the Constitution might need to be changed? That seems pretty extreme.
Yeah, that was a big red flag for a lot of people.
Okay, so things are pretty shaky here at home, but what about the global stage? What happens there if he keeps going down this path?
Well, his actions could really destabilize international relations and even erode America's standing in the world.
But how? What's he doing that could have such a big impact?
Well, his America First approach has basically created this more isolationist foreign policy.
But isn't it a good thing for America to put its own interests first? I mean, most countries do that, don't they?
They do, but it's about how you go about it. Trump's approach has been very confrontational, very transactional. He sees the world as this zero-sum game where for one country to win, another has to lose.
And that's not really how the world works.
No, it creates this climate of mistrust and makes it really difficult to cooperate on global challenges like climate change or pandemics.
So you're saying that even if he's just bluffing with some of those pronouncements, they still have a real impact on how other countries view America.
Exactly. Words matter, especially when they come from the most powerful person in the world.
Right. They can shape perceptions, influence decisions, and even set events in motion that are hard to control.
Precisely.
Okay, so let's talk about some concrete examples. You mentioned climate change. How have Trump's actions impacted that issue?
Well, his decision to pull out of the Paris Climate Agreement was a huge setback for international efforts to reduce emissions.
Yeah, that was pretty controversial.
It was, and his rollback of environmental regulations here at home hasn't helped either. It sends the message that the U.S. isn't serious about climate change.
But he argued that the Paris Agreement was unfair to American businesses and workers.
That was his argument, yes. But the scientific consensus is clear. Climate change is real, it's human-caused, and we need to act now.
And many experts argue that transitioning to a clean energy economy would actually be good for the economy in the long run.
Exactly. It would create jobs, boost innovation.
And what about his relationships with other world leaders? You know, we've heard a lot about his bromance with Putin and his admiration for guys like Kim Jong-un.
His affinity for authoritarian leaders is definitely concerning.
Yeah, it doesn't really inspire confidence in his commitment to democratic values.
No, it doesn't. And his unpredictable behavior and his tendency to alienate allies has really created a lot of instability and uncertainty on the world stage.
Okay, so let's bring it back to the question of dictatorship. How worried should we be? Is he really heading down that path?
I don't think it's helpful to try to label him or make predictions.
Right.
It's more about recognizing the potential dangers, staying vigilant, and protecting those democratic institutions.
But what can we do? It feels like things are already so far gone.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed, but it's important to remember that we're not powerless. There are things we can do both individually and collectively to push back against authoritarianism and defend democracy.
Like what? Give me some concrete example.
Well, first of all, we need to stay informed and engaged. It's important to hold our elected officials accountable,
Right.
support organizations that are fighting for those democratic values,
Okay,
and be willing to speak out against injustice.
I get that, but those things seem so small compared to the scale of the problem.
They may seem small, but they matter. Change happens from the bottom up. It starts with individuals raising their voices, demanding accountability, and refusing to be silenced.
So even in the face of these seemingly impossible challenges, you're saying there's still hope.
Absolutely. Hope is not just some naive optimism. It's a belief in the possibility of a better future and a willingness to fight for it.
Okay, I'm feeling a little more hopeful now, but I still have a lot of questions about how all of this is playing out globally.
I think that's a good place to pivot. Let's look at the specifics of Trump's foreign policy and its impact on different parts of the world and on global issues like climate change.
Yeah, let's dive into that. All right, so we've talked about the potential impact of Trump's second term on American democracy, the warning signs of authoritarianism, and then how his America First policy is kind of shaking things up internationally.
Right.
Where do we even begin to unpack all the global implications of his actions? It's a lot.
Yeah, it is. It's a complex web, but maybe a good place to start is with the Middle East.
Okay, yeah, you guys sent over a bunch of articles about his stance on the whole Israel-Hamas conflict.
Right, and specifically that ultimatum he gave Hamas right before he took office.
Oh, yeah, right. Return the hostages from the 2023 attacks or face consequences.
Exactly, and he didn't exactly rule out military action either.
That definitely got everyone's attention.
It did, and this isn't an isolated incident either. Trump's approach to the Middle East has consistently been very pro-Israel.
Right, even to the point of alienating Palestinian leaders and kind of undermining those peace efforts.
Exactly. I mean, remember when he moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem?
Yeah, and recognize those Israeli settlements in the West Bank.
A lot of people saw those as really provocative moves that just escalated tensions and made a negotiated solution even harder to achieve.
And now with this ultimatum to Hamas, it feels like he's risking getting the U.S. dragged into another long conflict in the region.
It's definitely a concern, and I think it speaks to a broader pattern in his foreign policy that has implications way beyond the Middle East.
What do you mean?
Well, he seems to prefer strong-arm tactics and unilateral action over diplomacy and multilateral cooperation.
So it's like my way or the highway.
Pretty much. And that approach has consequences. It can alienate allies, embolden adversaries, and create this climate of uncertainty and unpredictability.
And it doesn't exactly help with global issues like climate change either.
No, definitely not. I mean, his decision to pull out of the Paris Climate Agreement was a huge blow to international efforts to address climate change.
And he rolled back all those environmental regulations here at home, too.
Right. All of that sends a pretty clear message that the U.S. is no longer leading on this issue.
But his argument was that the Paris Agreement was bad for the American economy.
That was his justification, yes. But a lot of experts would disagree, arguing that actually transitioning to a clean energy economy would create jobs and boost economic growth.
And there's the whole scientific consensus that climate change is real and human caused. Like, we can't just ignore that.
Exactly.
So it sounds like this America First approach is really having this ripple effect around the world.
It is.
He's alienating allies, emboldening adversaries, and creating uncertainty on all these different fronts.
And you know what happens when there's a vacuum of leadership?
What?
Other players step in to fill the void.
Like who?
Well, China and Russia are the obvious ones. They're taking advantage of America's retreat to expand their own influence and reshape the global order.
And that's not necessarily a good thing.
Not if their values and goals don't align with those of democratic societies.
So what does all this mean for the future? Is this just a temporary blip, or are we witnessing some fundamental shift in the balance of power?
That's the million-dollar question, and honestly, I don't think anyone has a definitive answer. A lot depends on what happens in the next 4 years.
And whether other countries step up to fill that leadership gap.
Exactly.
So it's not just about Trump then, it's about these bigger trends he represents, like the rise of nationalism and the erosion of trust in international institutions.
Right, the growing divide between democratic and authoritarian values.
Trump is both a symptom and a cause of all of this.
Exactly. He exploits those trends for his own political gain, and in doing so, he exacerbates them.
It's a vicious cycle, hard to see how we break out of it.
It is tough, but you know, history teaches us that even in really dark times, human resilience and that yearning for freedom, they can prevail.
Really? So there's still hope.
There's always hope. It's not just a passive emotion, though. It has to be a call to action.
What do you mean?
It means recognizing the challenges we face, absolutely. But it also means recognizing our own agency, our ability to actually make a difference.
Okay, so what can we do? What are some concrete things that people can do to push back against all of this?
It starts with each of us staying informed, staying engaged in our communities.
Right, holding our leaders accountable.
Exactly. Supporting those organizations that are fighting for democratic values, being willing to speak out against injustice.
And on a global scale, what can we do?
Well, promoting cooperation, strengthening alliances, countering the influence of authoritarian powers. It requires a multi-pronged approach, really.
Like diplomacy.
Yes, economic pressure, military strength, and a real commitment to promoting democratic values and human rights.
It's a lot.
It is, but working with like-minded countries to build a more just and equitable world order, it's a worthwhile goal.
It really is.
And ultimately, it's about more than just politics or geopolitics. It's about defending the fundamental values that underpin a free and open society.
Those are worth fighting for.
They are freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, the rule of law, respect for human dignity, all of those things.
It's a fight that requires courage and determination for sure.
And a belief that a better future is possible.
Well, that's a good note to end on. I think this has been a whirlwind of information,
It has.
but it's left me feeling both informed and empowered.
That's what we aim for. Knowledge is power, but only if we use it wisely.
So to everyone listening out there, remember, stay informed, stay engaged, and never give up hope.
The future is not predetermined. It's shaped by the choices we make today.